Bangkok, Thailand, September 1972. The Lumpinee Boxing Stadium on a championship night carries something in the air that you feel before you can name it. The smell of liniment and sweat and the particular incense that burns near the entrance. The sound of the traditional Sarama music playing from live musicians in the corner. The crowd packed so tight that the body heat of 8,000 people creates its own climate inside the building. This stadium has hosted Muay Thai competition since 1956, and the walls have absorbed enough of it that you feel the history as a physical thing. A weight that comes down from the rafters and settles on everyone inside. Bruce Lee is sitting in the front row. He arrived in Bangkok 3 days ago for film meetings, and a mutual friend had arranged the invitation. He was not announced. The event organizers knew he was present, and the people close enough to the front row to recognize his face knew. But officially, he was simply a guest in a good seat, watching one of the finest Muay Thai championship cards Bangkok had staged in several years. He had been watching with the kind of attention he always brought to serious fighting, which was total and patient, and continuously building a picture from what he observed, rather than cataloging moments as isolated impressions. He had been watching Muay Thai closely since arriving in Thailand, and this evening had given him more to work with than the previous 3 days combined. The woman who won tonight's championship had been in his attention specifically since her first match of the card 2 hours earlier. Her name was Saenjai Frumthep. She was 27 years old, born in Chiang Mai, trained in Muay Thai since she was 12. 15 years of practice that had produced a fighter the Thai sporting press covered with the specific reverence they reserved for practitioners who had moved past being competitive and into being something closer to exemplary. Her style was classical Muay Thai without decoration, every technique exactly what it was supposed to be and nothing additional, the specific beauty of something built entirely around function. Her record coming into tonight was 44 wins, 2 losses, 31 of those wins by knockout or technical stoppage. The losses came in the second year of her career, before she was fully formed, and she had avenged both of them. 41 consecutive wins since, the most recent 11 of them at championship level. She had won 3 matches tonight, the final against a fighter from Chiang Rai who was genuinely formidable and who had made Sanjay work in the second and third rounds in a way that the crowd appreciated even as they were rooting against her, ended on points. Not a close decision. A clear one, but earned through real effort rather than handed over. The crowd response when the decision was announced was the response of people recognizing something that belonged to them, their tradition and their champion and their pride in both, expressed at full volume in a building that knew how to produce volume. The promoter, a man named Kun Suchart, who had been running Lumpinee events for 8 years, took the microphone for the trophy presentation. He said several things in Thai about the evening and the championship and the champion. Then he said something that the section of the crowd closest to the front row heard before the rest of them, because the front row was where the announcement was directed. He said that, for the trophy presentation tonight, the stadium was honored to have a special guest, someone whose respect for Thai martial arts had brought him here as a genuine student of the discipline rather than as a visitor. He said the guest had agreed to present the championship trophy personally. He looked toward the front row and said in English, "Bruce Lee." The reaction that moved through 8,000 people was complicated and layered in a way that stadium reactions rarely are. The section that had known he was there erupted first. Then, recognition moved through the rows behind them as the name was passed person to person, and the response built as it traveled, growing with each section that understood what was being said until the building was producing a sound that had genuine mass and heat in it, the sound of a crowd that has been surprised with something it values. Bruce stood from his front row seat and nodded to Kun Suchart, who was extending the championship trophy toward him from the ring apron. He took the trophy, walked to the ring steps, and climbed them. He stepped through the ropes and straightened and looked across the ring toward Saenjai, who was standing at the center with her coaches nearby, and he brought his hands together in front of his chest and bowed. The formal bow of someone who understands what the gesture means in this context and is giving it completely. Sanjay watched this. She had been watching since his name was announced, tracking his movement from the front row to the ring with the focused attention she gave everything that entered her space. Her expression during the bow was the expression of someone receiving information and deciding what to do with it. She stepped toward the microphone stand that had been set up at the ring center for the post-match ceremony. She said something in Thai that the section of the crowd who heard it clearly produced a surprised reaction to, and then she said it again in English, slowly and with the precision of someone who has learned a language carefully and wants to be understood accurately. She said, Thai warriors do not bow to Hollywood actors. The stadium went from its considerable noise to something considerably quieter in about 2 seconds, 8,000 people adjusting simultaneously. Then she said more. She said that Muay Thai was the art of 8 limbs, that it was a living tradition carried in the bodies of practitioners who had dedicated their lives to it across generations, that it was not a backdrop for film productions or a source of exotic imagery for Western entertainment. She said that what was being presented to the world as Asian martial arts through films and television was a distortion, a commercial product that borrowed the appearance of real disciplines while removing their substance. She said that the person standing across from her with a trophy had built a career on that distortion. She said, "You profit from the image of what we have built. You do not have standing here." 8,000 people were very quiet. Bruce stood where he had been standing when he bowed, still holding the trophy, and his expression had not changed significantly from how it had been when he climbed through the ropes. He looked at Sanjay with the attention that was his most consistent quality in any situation, reading her the way he read everything, not just the surface of what was being said, but the structure underneath it. He looked at Kun Suchart, who had the expression of a promoter watching his championship ceremony become something that was not in the program and calculating at full speed whether anything could be done about it. Bruce said, in English, clearly, "May I borrow the microphone?" Kun Suchart hesitated for approximately 1 second and then handed it over, because the situation was past the point where hesitation would accomplish anything useful. Subscribe right now. What Bruce Lee says next is the thing that changes the temperature of the entire stadium, and you do not want to be the person who missed it. Bruce said, holding the microphone, "I want to respond to what was said." The stadium settled into the specific quality of attention that 8,000 people produce when they have decided collectively that what comes next is worth their full focus. He said, "I started training in Wing Chun at 13 years old. I trained under Ip Man in Hong Kong. I've been studying and developing martial arts seriously for 20 years. In that time, I have built a system I call Jeet Kune Do, and I currently have students across 2 countries who train in it. I am a martial artist who has made films. That order matters." He paused. "I understand why you might believe what you said. The films are the visible part of what I do. The training is not visible to most people. What's not visible is real." Sanjay looked at him from across the ring. She said into her own microphone, which Kun Suchart had quickly provided, "Real is testable." Bruce said, "Yes." She said, "Then be tested." 8,000 people made the sound of 8,000 people simultaneously understanding that something is going to happen. Kun Suchart stepped toward the ring center with the expression of a man who has organized this event for months and is watching it become something entirely different from what was planned. He said several things in Thai and English that were reasonable and professional and had no effect whatsoever on the direction of events. Bruce said to him, "It's all right." Kun Suchart said, "Mr. Lee, I really don't think—" Bruce said, "She asked a genuine question. It deserves a genuine answer." He set the trophy down at the edge of the ring, carefully, upright. He looked at Sanjay. He said, "Your terms." Sanjay said, "Muay Thai rules, what I know. You use what you know, the referee calls it." She gestured at the championship fight's referee, who was still in the ring and had been watching this development with the specific professional neutrality of someone whose job description had not covered this scenario. Bruce nodded. The referee looked at Kun Suchart. Kun Suchart looked at the ceiling briefly, and then at his hands, and then at the 8,000 people who were waiting for what happened next. He made the decision that event promoters make when the situation is past their control, which was to make it as safe as possible and then get out of the way. He said to the referee in Thai to keep it clean and stop it if it needed stopping. The referee acknowledged this. He stepped to the center of the ring and established terms in Thai and English. Light contact, exhibition format. He looked at both of them. Both nodded. They took their positions. Sanjay moved into her fighting stance, the classical Muay Thai guard that 15 years had built into her, everything precisely where it needed to be, her weight on her rear foot, her lead hand at the correct height, her chin protected. Her stance was the stance of someone who had been doing this since they were 12 years old, built not from instruction, but from the internalization of instruction through years of repetition. Bruce stood the way he always stood, which looked like nothing specific to anyone who didn't know what they were looking at. The referee indicated they could begin. Sanjay threw a teep. The Muay Thai push kick, her front foot extending toward Bruce's midsection, fast and technically exact, aimed at establishing range and reading how he moved under pressure. Bruce wasn't there. His body had angled sideways, a rotation that took his midsection offline from the kick's trajectory, and his right hand came up and touched her extending shin as it passed. A point of contact, brief and specific. 1 second. Sanjay recovered and came back with a right cross, trying to find his center before he could create the angle again. Bruce slipped it to his left, the punch passing beside his face, and his hand touched her extended shoulder. Another placement. 2 seconds. She threw a left hook, trying to use the angle his slip had created, reading the situation correctly and adjusting faster than most opponents she had fought. Bruce moved inside the hook, into the space where it couldn't complete its arc, and from that inside position, his right hand found her ribs. 1 contact, placed with the precision of someone who has spent 20 years developing exactly this kind of precision. 3 seconds. She tried to clinch. The Thai clinch was one of her strongest positions, where her knees had ended fights and where her superior weight and wrestling strength created advantages. She reached for the back of his neck with both hands. Bruce's head was not where her hands arrived. He had moved it offline from her reaching grip, and as her arms extended past him, he stepped to the side of her reach, and his hand found the back of her neck, touching the exact position she had been trying to control, held for 1 count. 5 seconds. The referee called it. The stadium produced a sound that had no clean category. 8,000 people trying to process something simultaneously, the noise of collective recalibration happening in real time. It lasted for about 4 seconds before it resolved into something louder and more unified, the sound of a crowd that has witnessed something it will be describing to people who weren't here for decades. Bruce lowered his hand and stepped back to neutral. Sanjay stood in the position the exchange had left her in, and she was not hurt. Nothing had struck her with damaging force. She was standing with a touch on the back of her neck as the most recent physical information she had received, and the information that touch contained was specific and complete, and considerably more than she had been prepared for. She looked at Bruce. He waited. And then something happened that Kun Suchart would describe in the following years as the most difficult 30 seconds he had ever managed at any event he had organized. Sanjay came again. Like this video right now, not for any algorithm, because what happens in the next 60 seconds is the part of this story that nobody who was there has ever been able to describe the same way twice. She came again because 15 years of serious training doesn't switch off because a scoring system says the exchange is complete, because she was Sanjay Frumthep, who had won 44 fights and who had stood in this ring many times and had never had an opponent demonstrate that clearly and that quickly what the space between them actually contained. She came with a right kick to the body, hard and committed, the kick that had stopped opponents before the bell in 11 of her championship matches. Bruce stepped sideways with her momentum rather than against it, the kick passing along his side rather than into it, and as she recovered her foot to the ground, his hand found her lead shoulder. Another notation, another placement, another held count. She came with a left elbow, short range, the technique she was most respected for, throwing it from a position she had built through the sequence of the previous kick. He ducked under it, and his left hand touched her extended arm at the elbow, redirecting it slightly across her own center line, and she stumbled 1 step forward, past her intended position. She caught herself. She turned. Her expression had moved through several things and had arrived somewhere that was harder to read than anything before it, something that was past pride and past frustration and into something more specific and more serious. She came with everything. A full combination, the combination she had used in the 3rd round of the final tonight that had done the most damage to her opponent, throwing it with complete commitment and complete speed. Bruce moved through the middle of it, inside the first technique, the motion of his body taking him through the gap between the first and second strikes, and as the combination completed around him, he was in a position beside her, and his hand came forward and touched the side of her jaw. Open palm, 2 fingers, placed with a precision that communicated exactly where she was and what was available from this position. She sat down, not from force, from the specific consequence of her own committed momentum meeting a redirect that her balance couldn't correct for in the available time. She sat down on the ring canvas, and the sound of it was clean and clear in the quiet that had fallen over the stadium. Bruce stepped back. He was not breathing significantly harder than when he had climbed through the ropes. The referee was moving toward the center of the ring. Kun Suchart was on the ring apron, saying something urgent. 2 of Sanjay's coaches had come through the ropes and were crossing to her. Sanjay put her hand on the canvas and pushed herself up. She came up fast, the way trained fighters come up from falls, and she was on her feet before any of the people crossing the ring to manage the situation had reached her. Her coaches reached her first. One of them took her arm. She registered his presence without looking at him, her eyes on Bruce, who had moved toward the ring ropes in the direction of the exit. She pulled her arm from her coach's hand and moved after him. Security staff who had been stationed at the ring's corners were moving. The two who reached the path between her and Bruce moved into it with the professional efficiency of people whose job was to create distance between fighters in exactly this kind of situation. She didn't try to go through them. She went around one of them, and the other adjusted, and for a moment the ring had the specific organized confusion of a space where several people are trying to accomplish different things with their bodies simultaneously. Kun Suchart was saying her name. Her head coach was saying something in Thai that carried the specific urgency of someone who has been coaching long enough to know when a situation needs very direct communication. Several of the ring's corner men were moving. Bruce had stopped at the ropes. He was not trying to leave anymore. He had heard the movement behind him and turned back toward the ring's center and was standing at the ropes watching the managed confusion with the same quality of attention he had given everything else this evening. Sanjay stopped. She stopped because her head coach had said something specific in Thai that the people close enough to hear later described as more instruction than request, the kind of thing you say to someone you have trained for years when you need them to hear you rather than hear the situation. She stood in the ring with her coaches on either side of her and the security staff forming a loose boundary, and Kun Suchart speaking quietly to everyone in reach, and she looked at Bruce across the distance that had been created between them. She said something in Thai. Her coach translated it into English, quietly, for the people close enough to hear. He said she wanted to ask something. Bruce said, "Ask." She said, in English, "The kick. My right kick to the body, you moved with it." He said, "Yes." She said, "You moved before it arrived." He said, "Before it fully committed, yes." She said, "What did you see?" He said, "Your right hip loads about a third of a second before the kick, a small rotation. It happens before your leg moves." She absorbed this. She said, "Show me." He said, "Now?" She said, "Show me what the hip does." He demonstrated it from where he stood, showing her in his own body what the rotation looked like, exaggerating it slightly so she could see the shape of it. She watched with the focused attention of someone filing technical information. She said, "I've fought for 15 years. He said, "The tell is that deep. It's built into how you initiate the kick. It's not a flaw. It became a flaw tonight because I was looking for it." She said, "Nobody looked for it before." He said, "Most people don't look at the level before the technique." The ring was quieter now. The urgency of the previous 60 seconds had reduced into something more like the aftermath of urgency. Everyone present still present, but no longer in motion. 8,000 people in the stadium were watching the ring with the specific quiet of a crowd that has been through a lot of different kinds of noise in the last several minutes and has arrived at the kind that wants to hear what is being said. Sanjay said, "I said things tonight that I said about you before I knew what I was talking about." He said, "You said what you believed." She said, "I believed something incomplete." He said, "That's different from being wrong entirely. You were right that film representation of martial arts is often distorted. You were wrong that I am the distortion." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I made that statement in front of 8,000 people." He said, "Yes." She said, "In front of everyone who respects this tradition." He said, "Yes?" She said, "I should have asked before I declared." He said, "Yes." She looked at him for a long moment. The expression on her face had been sorting itself out since she sat down on the canvas and had now arrived at something that was simpler and more honest than anything that had been there before. She said, "I want to show you something. Subscribe if you are still here." The next part is the part that nobody in that stadium expected after everything that came before it. She went to the corner of the ring and she came back with the championship trophy that had been set there when the ceremony was disrupted. She carried it to the center of the ring and she held it out to Bruce. He looked at it. She said, "This is yours to present. That was why you were here." I interrupted that. He said, "I'll present it to you." She said, "After what I said." He said, "What you said and what you are two different things. What you are is the champion of this event. That's what the trophy is for." She looked at him holding the trophy out toward her, this man she had stood in the ring with for the last several minutes, and who had put her on the canvas and who was now standing there in front of 8,000 people offering her the trophy she had earned with 15 years of genuine work, with the same simple patience he had brought to the whole evening. She took it, she held it, and she looked at it, and then she looked at Bruce, and she said, quietly enough that only the nearby people heard it clearly, "I owe you something honest." He said, "You don't owe me anything." She said, "I owe this crowd something honest." She picked up the microphone. She looked out at 8,000 people who were watching and listening. She said, in Thai first and then in English, "I said something at the beginning of this ceremony about the man standing beside me. I said he had no standing here. I said he was profiting from a distorted image of what we practice." She paused. "I said all of this before I had tested whether any of it was true." She paused again. 8,000 people were completely quiet. She said, "I was wrong. Not about the distortion. The distortion is real and I will always say so. But I was wrong about this specific man. What he carries is real. I know this because I felt it." She looked at Bruce. "He came to this ring tonight with respect, which I did not return to him. I am returning it now." She brought her hands together and bowed, deeply. The formal bow of Muay Thai, the bow of a fighter to someone they recognize as genuine. The stadium responded. 8,000 people who had been through a championship match and a confrontation and a managed near incident and everything in between, responding to this moment with the specific collective warmth of people who have watched something difficult resolve with honesty. Bruce returned the bow, completely, holding it for the same duration she held hers. When he straightened, he looked at the trophy she was holding, and he looked at the crowd, and he said into the microphone, "Sayanjai Frumthep, your champion. Everything you saw her do tonight was real. Everything she has built for 15 years is real. This tradition is real. I am honored to have been in this ring with her." The stadium's response to this was the loudest sound of the evening. Backstage, in the corridor outside the dressing rooms, with the stadium still audible through the walls, Sanjay found Bruce before he left the building. She was still in her competition clothes, her hands still wrapped. She said, "The hip rotation, on my right kick." He said, "Yes." She said, "How do I fix it?" He explained it to her, standing in that corridor, specifically and practically, the same way he explained things to students who asked genuine questions, without performance and without holding anything back. He told her where the tell originated in the sequence of her kick, what it communicated and when, and what the correction would require in terms of rebuilding the initiation from a different starting point. She listened with the focused attention she had brought to the ring. She asked 3 specific questions. He answered all 3. She said, "That's months of work." He said, "Yes." She said, "My kick will be worse before it gets better." He said, "Yes." She said, "I've done that kind of work before." He said, "I know, it shows." She said, "Will you write down what you told me, the specific points? I don't want to lose the detail." He found a pen in his jacket pocket, which he always carried because he was always writing things down, and a piece of paper from the same jacket, which he also always carried, and he wrote out the technical points in the corridor under fluorescent lights while she watched. He handed her the paper. She read it. She folded it and held it. She said, "Why are you helping me?" He said, "Because you asked honestly. Because the question you asked tonight, in front of everyone, whether what I do is real, it was the right question. The method was direct. The question itself was right. Right questions deserve complete answers." She said, "The method was more than direct." He said, "Yes." She said, "I'm not sorry I asked it." He said, "I know, I wouldn't want you to be. If you hadn't asked it, tonight would have been a trophy ceremony. This is better." She looked at him for a moment. Then she said something in Thai. He didn't speak Thai fluently, but he had spent enough time in Bangkok to recognize the phrase she used, which was an expression of respect that was more formal than ordinary thanks. He responded in the Thai he had, which was limited, but which included the appropriate acknowledgement for the expression she had used, and she looked at him with the first genuine surprise of the evening at something that wasn't physical. She said, "You speak some Thai," he said. "A little. I've been here for 3 days and I learned fast." She said, "3 days?" He said, "I had good teachers." She almost smiled. It was the first thing on her face since before the ceremony that wasn't organized around the situation, just a flicker of something genuine and unmanaged. She said, "Come back to Bangkok." He said, I plan to. She said, come to my gym. I train in the morning. He said, which morning? She said, any morning. I'm always there. He said, I'll find it. She said, everyone knows where it is. He said, then I'll find it easily. She held the folded piece of paper. She said, the hip rotation. I'm going to work on it tonight. He said, work on feeling it first before you try to change it. You can't change something you can't feel. She said, I'll feel it first. He said, that's the right order. She nodded once, the nod of someone who has received something and is incorporating it. Then she walked back toward the dressing rooms. She worked on the hip rotation for 4 months. The people who trained alongside her during those months described a period in her training that had a specific quality, more focused in a particular direction, more willing to be slower and less impressive in the service of something being rebuilt correctly. Her right kick was not what it normally was during those months. She knew this. She continued working. She fought again 5 months after the Bangkok Championship. She won by technical knockout in the 3rd round. The people who watched closely said her right kick had changed in a way they could feel more than describe, something in the initiation that was less predictable than it had been. The tell reduced to something smaller. She won 3 more championships in the following 2 years. She kept the piece of paper Bruce had written in the corridor. She kept it in the training journal she maintained for years, pressed between the pages alongside her own notes. She never showed it to anyone, and she never described its contents specifically. When students asked about it, she said it was a technical note from someone who taught her something she didn't know she needed to learn. She taught for 30 years after her competitive career. Her school produced fighters who competed across Southeast Asia and whose technical quality was recognizable to people who knew what they were looking at. Her students described her teaching as uncompromising in its standards and patient with the time those standards required, the specific combination of a teacher who would not accept less than your best and who understood that your best took time to arrive. When students struggled with deeply established patterns, she told them that the depth of the pattern was proportional to the value of correcting it, that shallow things were easy to fix and didn't matter much, that the things that mattered were deep and took a long time, and the time was the price, and the price was fair. She said this in different words at different times, but always with the same underlying thing. And the students who knew her long enough eventually understood that the patience she had for their corrections was not general patience, but specific patience, earned in a specific place at a specific time by working on a specific thing and finding out what that work actually required. The stadium was full that night in Bangkok. 8,000 people who came for a championship and watched something larger than that, something that started as a confrontation and ended as a conversation and produced months of quiet work and years of better teaching. That is what real exchanges produce, not the moment. What the moment makes possible afterward, in the gyms and the corridors in the early mornings when nobody is watching and the work is just the work, patient and specific and honest. That is the whole story. Subscribe if it was worth your time. And tell me in the comments, what is one thing you were wrong about that turned out to be the most useful lesson you ever learned? I read everyone.